What's up everyone, my name is Rosendo, welcome back to my channel. We are back with another video, and today we are going to be breaking down my latest mix. I feel like it's been a while, I feel like I haven't, made a video like this in a while. I know I made my my AI overview, but I recorded that so long ago. I've had a few busy weekends again. Just things I've been doing and events I've been going to. I know I said things were going to slow down, and I think they finally started to. I don't know if they have or haven't, I don't know. But yeah, I haven't forgotten about the videos. I'm still here. Obviously, you guys got the Opus mix. Well, actually, I'm recording this a little bit. This is strange. I meant to upload it doesn't matter what the upload schedule is, but Opus Mix just came out a few days ago. It came out on Friday a few days ago, that would be the 26th. I'm recording this the 28th. Next week you'll get the AI video I meant to drop a long time ago. And now we're back with me. I know I talked about videos where it's kind of meant for the general population and videos where it's just, me doing my thing. We are doing my thing, breaking down my Opus Mix. Alright, but yeah, that's enough about that, because we're taking a look at my Opus mix. We're going to be breaking down the mix. I've broken down probably two mixes at this point, my open format mix and my trance mix, and I actually want to go through some of my old mixes and maybe break down my bass house mix and drum and bass mix, because those are actually kind of quite good. But today we're talking Opus, so without further ado, let's hop into Mixcloud. Alright, we are back in Mixcloud taking a look at my latest mix, Opus Volume 1. Actually, I forgot I broke down my Summer Drives mix as well. So it's my third mix breakdown. As I mentioned, though, I want to break down those other two mixes. But I feel like I've broken down enough of my mixes that you guys kind of know what to expect, what they sound like, and why this one is a little bit different. Alright, so what is Opus? Why did I make this mix? All that stuff. Opus is just the word that I'm personally using to describe this form of not only DJing, but just kind of doing anything music related in general, that kind of has a little bit more intention, and it's really just meant to be taken in and really seriously listened to, like everything I basically made up to this point, almost everything. I've talked before about, things in my Expression EP and all other tracks. For example, Night is a good example. About tracks where I really want the listener to be immersed and to take it seriously and not just treat it like another song or another mix, but really treat it like a piece of art. That's kind of what the idea behind Opus is. The idea is that I want this to be something a little bit more. I want it to be something a little bit more meaningful, that you don't just hit play and, have it in the background, but you really try to pay close attention and you take it for something more. Take it as something that was created with intention, that had weight behind every single decision, that was really meant to be something great, that was meant to be something significant. And that's kind of how Opus turned into this idea of this section of my mixing and my style that not only is a little bit more intentional, like, things like Night and Long Term and Expression and all that stuff, but in this specific case in my mixing and DJing side of things, where I mix and we take some genres that are the long-term genres, that are progressive, that are intentional, that really have a little bit more to them if you have the patience to some extent to listen to them and enjoy them all the way through. I mean, we're talking anything progressive house, melodic techno, and trance, and a lot of progressive trance. That's basically the idea behind Opus, is those three genres, or really any genre that's meant to be more progressive, long-term, and intentional, and putting them in a mix. Now, I know I talked a little bit about this in my trance mix that was pretty mediocre. I talked about in that breakdown why I thought it was mediocre, and how I talked about how I want, the idea of my trance mix is to include a little bit of everything, include some progressive tracks, some progressive house, some progressive trance maybe, and maybe some melodic techno, and just start blending everything together, and some melodic house. And that's kind of where Opus Mix really what it was meant to be. My trance mix was kind of meant to be something like this, but I was a little bit more impulsive in that trance mix, and this is kind of the idea of what I have when I have my trance side, but more accurately what I now call my Opus side. And that is Opus. That's why this is called Opus. I'm calling this my Opus mix. Opus is kind of the category, it's the title. And this is volume 1 of the mix, because I expect there to be many more volumes here, but where I can kind of do whatever I want, maybe have a little bit more of a melodic house one, maybe have a much more uplifting trance one, or whatever. This is Opus. All right, now real quick, I want to talk about how this mix was made, because I've already mentioned how I make my mixes, but I want to emphasize that one more time, because this is a 90-minute Opus mix, and I want to make sure it's clear how I make them. I talked about how the trance mix was, I actually already talked about this quite a bit, my trance mix, so I'll try to keep this short, but my trance mix up to this point was the only mix I made where I just kind of start, play, record, go for it, and done. My Opus mix was made in my kind of more traditional way of mixing, and it took me a while to make this mix. I'll talk about how I made it in a bit, But I was kind of struggling because after that trance mix, I wanted to make another mix like that, but I just realized, and I had to remind myself rather, that that's not how I shine. I shine with kind of much more methodical and a little bit more carefully curated things, and the mixes are no exception. That doesn't mean that I necessarily kind of plan everything out in advance, although I'm going to talk about how I do, because I do, but it's still a representation of me mixing live. So let's talk about how I made this mix so that's completely transparent. All right, so I'll make this brief. How do I make my mixes? I normally start either just on my laptop or on my decks already, but I'm just sitting down. I'm not recording. I'm not doing anything. Let's imagine I'm right here in front of my computer. I don't know if I've ever shown you guys the behind the scenes of my studio, actually. So I don't know if you guys know what this looks like. Maybe that's a video for another time, but let's imagine that my computer is right here. I have 2 monitors here, and I have my decks right in front of me. What'll usually happen when I'm ready to make a mix is I'll be in the mood of kind of, all right, I'm in the mood to make a mix, and I'll just start with the track that I want to start with, and I'll hit play, and I'll just build up a track list from there. I'm not recording, I'm not trying to make sure everything's perfect, but I'm just building up a track list as if I were DJing live. So I hit play, I start with a song that whatever I want to start with, and I think, okay, I like this song, I like starting with the song, let me add it to my track list. And then I think, okay, if I were live, what would I play next? I say, okay, probably I would play this song. I throw it in there. I make sure, and then I transition as I would normally transition if I were live. I think, okay, A, I like the song that I chose next, and B, a transition works there. I could do a transition there, add it to the track list. And that's how I build a track list of, this track list is 18 songs. That's how I build an 18-song track list and mix. Now, what usually ends up happening is about every 3, 4, or 5 songs or so, I'll just keep doing that normally. It's a pretty accurate representation. And then I'll get to the point where I don't know what I would play next. And maybe, again, every 4 or 5 songs, I'll play a song next and I'll think, I actually don't like that one. Then I probably go back, take my time, try a few things, find a song that I like, and then think, okay, that's a good one to go next. And then I repeat, I go a few songs in a row, just doing everything naturally. And then again, maybe 4 or 5 songs later, I think, actually, I don't like that transition. Let me try something else, and then go from there. Occasionally, what will happen too is that I'll choose a song, and then I'll be playing a song, and then I'll choose the song that goes next. I'll add it to the queue, and I'll hit a transition that doesn't really work all that well, but the song, the movement from the first song to the next song is good. So I'll think, okay, that's good. I'll add that to the track list, but I'll just make a note that I should probably practice that transition and figure it out later. And that's how I end up with an 18-song track list. So I make my mixes as if I were doing them live, but after that, I prep a track list, and then I actually prep the transitions. I don't know if I've talked about this before, but I prep the transitions just to make sure things are smooth. Just to make sure, okay, let's say I'm doing Rufus to Soul. Let's say I'm going from In the Moment to We Could Be Love. I transition normally, and I think, okay, let's see, what am I doing here? Outro, intro, transition, good. Okay, I write down that works, and then I kind of put that in my transition notes. Outro, intro, transition, normal. Every once in a while, you'll get a harder one. Like, I think this one, I think these are all pretty easy. But something like this was a little bit more significant. But for example, something definitely like Breathe In to Take Me Away, I really had to be a little bit more careful. So then I play Breathe In, I transition to Take Me Away, and then I kind of have to tweak it a little bit and figure out. And then once I do, maybe I set some hot cues or whatever, and I write down my transition notes, and I have everything, and then I record everything in one sitting. But yes, I do have the track list planned, I do have the transitions planned, but they're more or less a representation of what I could do live. And again, for the sake of transparency, every once in a while I'll need to touch a few things up. For example, let's take this transition as well, Breathe In to Take Me Away. Let's say I do it while I'm recording and it's a little bit rough. I'll probably re-record it and then patch it in and as kind of in later in my DAW. And I don't really consider that cheating because I know I can do the transition well. It just happened to be that in that take, maybe I didn't get the frequencies just right, or maybe I accidentally, had one of the kicks just a split second too early and you just hear them clashing a little bit. If I know I can do the transition right, I don't feel bad kind of retaking it and patching it back in because it's meant to be a representation of what I know I can do. If I couldn't do it, I wouldn't do it. But sometimes, things aren't just completely perfect and I'm a perfectionist. I want them to be kind of perfect. So I think, okay, I just kind of messed up the transition a little bit. The frequencies just weren't quite there. I'll just retake it and then patch it in. And that is the honest, transparent way of how I make my mixes. Pretty much made in the moment, but then once I have everything sorted out and organized, I make my notes, I make the track list, and I record it in one go and patch in anything that wasn't perfect. full transparency for you guys. Now, the only other thing I want to say about that is I talked about probably actually in my trance mix that I don't like how it takes, and I really don't, but I'm gonna mention this. I don't like the fact that it takes me many hours to make a mix that it would take other people 90 minutes to make, an hour and 30 minutes to make. But here's one thing I'm going to share with you guys, and it's nothing too serious. But here's one thing I'm going to share with you guys. I am the type of person that likes to be a little bit more organized, a little bit more methodical, and a little bit more intentional, and kind of a perfectionist in what they do. And I've just realized that about myself at this point. So I'm not the type of person that would make a mix. I still do live sets, don't get me wrong. But I'm not the type of person that, would make a mix, a few mixes a week and just hit record and put something out there. I could be, but I'm not, and to some extent, I don't want to be that person. I like the methodical side of me where I can be a little bit more careful and construct things a little bit more methodically and just put together something with a little bit more weight to it, a little bit kind of more seriousness to it, even if it takes me 5 times as long as the next person. So that is where we are at with my Opus mix, a 90-minute mix of 18 tracks. I have no clue. That's probably 5 minutes per track. I think I average somewhere around there. But that is how I made this mix. That is how I want to make my mixes, and that is why I mentioned in my summer drives breakdown why I want to be that person that kind of puts a mix out every once in a while, but it's more of a big deal. It's not just that I recorded something and I put it out there, but there's some more weight to it, some more intention to it. And it's quite a big deal that, hey, I finally put out a mix. Let's listen to it. Let's see what we're going to get this time. All right. And that's probably all you need to know about the Opus mix. Last thing I'll share, because for some reason I share how I actually started to make this mix. And I remember because I struggled quite a bit to start this mix because, again, after the trance mix, I just wanted to sit down and record something beginning to end. But I couldn't quite do it with this Opus mix. And that's when I kind of realized that I could be that person that records something quickly, but that's not how I like to record my things, and that's not the type of artist I want to be. And what happened was, this is the last thing I'll say, just sharing a little bit about how this mix got started, is what happened was at one point I got a gig for, putting on a set just like this, actually, more what I would call an Opus set. And I was kind of getting some new songs, and I was like, okay, this was my first Opus set, so I had to get all my songs. I was going through Beatport, and I was thinking, okay, which songs do I want? Which ones for my playlist do I want to get into Rekordbox and buy? And what happened was, because I wanted to practice a little bit because it was my first time mixing an Opus set, is I started, I really got in the zone at that point, and I just hit play, and I thought, okay, let's imagine I'm DJing right now. At this point, I'm like, I have my decks, I'm standing up, I have lights down, speakers on, everything. I'm like, let me imagine what it's like to actually start this set. And then I start a set actually probably exactly like this, right? And this is sometime in the summer, by the way, maybe like late spring, early summer. And I think, okay, let me just practice Opus. Let me make an Opus set starting now. And I hit play, and then I just kind of get in the zone and make a set that I really, really like the direction of. And normally what I do is I practice like the first 3 tracks or something. I think, okay, I'm pretty confident with my start, and I can figure out the rest from there. But I kind of got carried away, and I started kind of making, I'm pretty sure I made this exact thing. I definitely got to 5. I maybe got to 6. But then I thought, okay, I have enough practice, cool. I don't want to make the full, I don't want to do a full Opus set, because then once the gig comes up, I'm going to be tempted to do the exact same thing, and I don't want to do the exact same thing when I'm mixing live. So I thought, okay, I need to stop myself there, because if any further, I'm just going to have a track list for my live sets, and I don't have track lists for my live sets. For my mixes, I do. For my live sets, I don't. Maybe the first 2 tracks, and then I go from there. Now, long story short, that gig got canceled, but I always liked the kind of the direction I was heading when I was practicing with these first 5 tracks, and I thought, man, that would have been a killer set. And then after that, I try to think, okay, I try to get myself in that same exact mood where I thought, okay, if I just had kept going, I could have made a killer mix there. So now's the time. Let me try again, a week or 2 later. Let me try again right now. Hit record, and I just start trying to go for the same direction, but I just couldn't do it. I couldn't recreate it. I just wasn't really in the mood. And then I sat down a few months later, I sat down and told myself, like, you know what? Why am I still trying to force it at this point? Just because I was in the mood at that time and I was in the zone that time doesn't mean I need to switch my style and personality to make my mixes like that every single time. Let me go back to being kind of the more patient and methodical version of me, and let's kind of make a mix the way I normally make my mixes. So then again, I did the same thing where I sat down and I thought, okay, let me just start by recreating what I knew. And then I started with this, and I made my way here, and I made my way here, and then slowly things started kind of coming together again. And if I can do everything in one go, then it's even better, because I don't get interrupted, and I kind of experience the storytelling in the moment, and I can really craft the narrative of my mix in one sitting. but I actually couldn't. I'll talk about that as I start breaking down the mix, probably if I ever do at this point. But I went back to kind of my traditional way of making my mixes, and finally I was able to put my Opus mix together, and I was finally able to get this out, and I was very, very happy with it. I am very happy with the result. But that's enough about that. Let's actually talk about the mix at this point, because there's one last thing I want to say. I forgot about this part, but now this is the last thing I want to say before I actually start to get into the mix. Now, I don't think I've mentioned this, and I'm actually talking about my mix at this point. I'm not talking about the background, or I'm talking about kind of how I feel about the mix, because I don't think I've mentioned this before, but every once in a while, as a producer, you'll hear a song where you just think, man, the producer really just snapped here. They did something where they were kind of in another level, and they made an amazing track. Divinity by Porter Robinson. Sad Machine by Porter Robinson. Call Me Crazy, Rebound by Matt Zoe and RD. I'm really, really liking that track right now. But every once in a while, you'll just hear that song, man, and think, man, I have no clue how the producer came up with this. They're just on a whole other level. And occasionally, actually, I'll hear my songs, a year later or 2 years later and think, I have no idea how I came up with that idea. This is a really nice song, and I have no idea how that came to me. Release is actually one where I kind of think about that quite a bit. And even some things out of my Expression EP, I think about that and think, wow, I don't know how I came up with that in that moment. Even kind of Call sometimes, because Call was put together quite well. Exposition sometimes as well, and just certain things like that I'll think, wow, I'm actually quite shocked that I was able to put together something so well. But the point I'm getting at is, I sometimes have the exact same feeling about this mix, where I'm listening to it and I hear some transitions and I hear the direction and the storytelling I go in, and I think, wow, I don't know how in the moment live I was able to think about that and do this, but it works so well. And I'm just shocked at my own abilities. So again, I think this mix is put really well together. I think there's some really nice storytelling behind it. And it just goes to show that, even I'm talking about myself at this point, I want to be confident in my abilities to do things live, because the fact that I could do, half of this mix kind of in one sitting and just push the narrative in a direction I really, really like. I'm impressed with my own abilities, and I'm surprised myself. And I really like how this mix turned out. This is probably... this is so much better. It's so much better than my trance mix. Trance mix, I said, was mediocre. I'm not happy with how it turned out. This is what the idea of what I had. My mixes, what I wanted them to be, and I'm very, very happy with how this mix turned out. I really like this Opus mix. Okay, but that's enough about that. Without further ado, let's actually break down the mix, because the mix is 90 minutes long, and I had no clue how long this mix was going to be. And I just started playing tracks in a row. But I'm going to talk about how it came together as I start breaking down the tracks. But yes, this was meant to have tracks that are longer in them. So, some of these tracks are 5, 6, 7 minutes long, and it's going to have some progression to it. So we're at my first 90-minute mix. This is basically my longest mix up to this point. Open format mix is an open format mix, so you're trying to go for 3, 4, 5, 6 hours at a time. But as far as kind of intentional artistic mixes go, 90 minutes, we are here. Opus mix, kicking it off with In the Moment Adriatique remix by Rufus de Sol and Adriatique. All right. As a reminder, music, I don't know if the music will be playing. I played the music in my last mix and my Summer Drives mix, and it kind of added to the environment, but it took away from the seriousness of it all, so I haven't decided if I'll put music in this one or not. But you start the mix off with In the Moment. It was pretty much my natural selection for the starting track. A little bit more melodic techno, but I really like this track. I like the kind of the atmosphere it sets at the start. And, including some melodic techno was going to be a part of this Opus mix. Not really too much to go over here until we get to the second track. But again, I want you guys to keep in mind that there's supposed to be, and there is, a lot of intention, and kind of there's a lot of weight to each track I play. So even though it's something as simple as I'm starting with In the Moment by Adriatique remix, just actually starting with that track just means a little bit more. And the fact that I chose it to be my starting track is supposed to carry some weight to it. It's not supposed to be, okay, first track, cool, let's listen to it. It's supposed to be, okay, what are we getting ourselves into? Where are we starting? Where are we going to go? What direction is this mix going to go in? And kind of what atmosphere and characters are we starting at the start of the mix? So again, every track is meant to have some weight to it. So it's not just as simple as playing this track. It's about choosing this track And that's the idea behind Opus, is thinking a little bit more about the whys behind each decision. And this track just sets a really nice environment. Now, moving on to the next track, there's one thing I will say. If you go to my open format mix breakdown, and even if you go to my Summer Drives mix breakdown, and actually it's my trance mix, all of them at this point, I kind of talk about how, and I don't know if I've mentioned it directly, but I'm going to mention it now. I kind of get in the habit of mixing and DJing in threes, where I kind of have 3 tracks to a section, then I move on to a different section, and I move on to a different section. The interesting thing about this track is, well, actually I haven't quite scrutinized the ending here, although it kind of still applies, is that I don't know why I got in the habit of DJing, and not in the habit, but this track kind of came together in 2s. And I think it works out really well. And again, it kind of happened just naturally, but I think deep down, subconsciously, there's a lot of kind of significance to the fact that I got in the habit, not got in the habit, but I naturally was inclined to DJ in 2s. And something about that just makes the progression work really well, especially when we're dealing with 5-minute tracks. I think I average about 5 minutes. Let's do some math. 90 divided by 18. Oh, wow, exactly 5. I could have done that in my head. That's just 90 divided by... that's just, yeah. So yeah, I average 5 minutes per track. So if you do 3 tracks, that's a long time for each section. But the direction just moves forward quite nice when you have a track and you let it play out and you just kind of move it forward with another track and then you move on, because something about the pacing just works really well. You kind of live with each track and with each section a little bit and a little bit longer, and you move forward at just the right pace. So again, somehow I naturally was inclined to DJ in 2s here, and it just works. It just works well. So I want you guys to kind of get used to that pacing and really try to appreciate that pacing, because the point is, after In the Moment, we go to We Could Be Love. Now, 2 things I want to say is, number one, again, straight from one. Oh, there's about 3 things I want to say. Oh, yeah, sit down, people. Okay, so 3 things I want to say. I want to make sure I don't forget any of them. Number one, as I mentioned, we're DJing in 2s here. We go from In the Moment Adriatic remix to a very similar track, We Could Be Love, another melodic techno track. Pacing and movement just works really well. Number 2, let's start with the other easy one first, because I have a feeling I'm going to rant quite a bit about the final point. Let's start with the simple one. I talked about in my trance mix how I wanted to get used to maybe... Oh, this is going to take a while. Number 2, I talked about in my trance mix about how I found trance hard to mix because I like to be in control of my highs and lows and of the energy and of the movement of each track, and I didn't feel like I was in control of that with trance. What I will say, what I did with this mix is I am the type of producer who sees the progression of each track as very, very meaningful. So what I've been doing recently, what I've been wanting to do for a long time, and what I kind of have done in the past, and I did a lot with this mix, is that if there's a track that I like that I don't quite like the progression of, or I like the progression of but I want an alternate to it, is I'll make my own edit of it. I'll extract the stems using FL Studio, and I'll make an edit of it where the progression changes. Maybe it doesn't have as many lows, maybe the highs come in a little bit quicker or something, and it allows me to have much more control over the pacing of my mixes. So in this mix, going back to this is gonna take a while. Going back to what I said about how sometimes I'll record a mix and I'll think, okay, I like this track, I don't like this track. What I did here is I like In the Moment, and I like how it goes into We Could Be Love, but I don't like how it goes from In the Moment to We Could Be Love, and then We Could Be Love comes down and then it comes back up kind of in the middle. So I made my own edit of We Could Be Love. I made a note when I was making the track list. I thought, okay, I like this, but if I had an edit of it, I would have played that live instead. So when it was time to record the mix and kind of get everything together, I made an edit of We Could Be Love. And now I have an edit of We Could Be Love in my library where the progression is just a little bit different, so that if I ever want a slightly more kind of forward moving version of We Could Be Love, I could play it, and that's exactly what I did. So if you're familiar with this track, or if you just want to go listen to it, you'll notice that after the first drop, where the first track comes down, I have an edit that I made where it just keeps moving forward, and it just makes the progression of this area just so much, it makes it better. I think it makes it objectively better, and things like that were absolutely crucial. I have a few edits that I made in here, 1, 2, maybe 3, 4, 5 or something. And then there are a few tracks where I got creative with some beat jumps and things like that and just kind of skipped certain sections altogether. But I think those two things were absolutely crucial to taking my mixing and kind of my storytelling to the next level, because again, I want to be in control of my highs and lows and the movements of each mix, and having those two things available to me made a big difference. That way, instead of in the trance mix where it just kind of felt like I was playing songs, you know, back to back, and I kind of was, here I was just in a little bit more control, and I was able to create the narrative however I want, and it made a massive difference. Okay, that was number 2. Now this last thing is going to go hand in hand with the number 3 is going to go hand in hand with number 2, which is, let's revisit, again, this is all important stuff. This is why I title this Opus. This is all very important stuff. I've talked for probably 10 minutes on the first 2 tracks, and I've been recording for over 30 minutes. So again, all important stuff. Opus here, people. Opus. Now, number 3 is, let's go back to the video I made about why the first 2 tracks are the most important, and how here I kind of break my rule, but again, naturally, it just felt right. Because I've talked about how the first track essentially sets the setting and the mood, and the second track sets the pacing of your mix. But when we start mixing in 2s instead of 3s, these 2 tracks kind of blend together really nicely, and it feels like that one first like the 2 tracks are just its own section of your mix. And that's why the progression edit was so important, because if after the first drop of We Could Be Love, it went back down, it just kills this progression entirely, and in my opinion, the whole mix is ruined right there. But with the progression edit of We Could Be Love, where in the moment blends really nicely to We Could Be Love and it keeps moving forward, these first 2 tracks turn into kind of one section. And what ends up happening is, instead of the first track of your mix setting the environment and the second track setting the direction, the first section sets the environment and the next section sets the direction of your mix. And I think that's part of the reasons why I kind of intuitively went to mixing in 2s, because with these longer tracks, if you can kind of get the progression just right, the sections take over more than the tracks themselves, unlike in every other mix I've done. Because we're a little bit more progressive here, the sections really shine instead of the tracks. And then you can kind of craft the narrative really nicely, where first 2 tracks set the environment, and even though we're not defining quite the genre of the mix, we're still defining the characteristics, which is why you let In the Moment Adriatic Remix play out, because it builds it up and it brings it down and up quite nicely, and it kind of peaks with that second drop. And we just keep it moving forward with We Could Be Love, which does come down eventually after the second drop, but after the first drop, it just maintains that pacing, so that we're still kind of setting the environment and the mood of being more intentional and progressive and having these highs and lows, but eventually the pacing is ultimately determined and set by Loss Aversion into Elysian. But because this is the next section, Loss Aversion really kind of sets that pacing and the direction and sets up the next part of the mix. So again, all important stuff here. We'll probably be able to go rather quickly between the last parts, but I'll probably still slow down quite a bit over here, and then we'll probably be pretty smooth over here. So there you go. In the Moment to We Could Be Love, and then the direction changes. The pacing kind of changes when you get to Loss Aversion. The transition is a little bit slow, just to kind of get you moving and come down from the melodic techno into the progressive trance. And then Loss Aversion comes in and it just pushes you forward. It keeps you going, and it really lets you know, okay, this is where we're going, this is where we're going to be. Let's get to it. So we're into Loss Aversion. Again, another reason why I let Loss Aversion play out completely and I let it come down all the way, because now that we're in a new section, we're kind of defining the direction and the pacing again. So by letting it come down, we allow the listener to realize that, okay, this is going to be a slow burning progressive mix. You let Loss Aversion come down and you go into Elysian, which either I did have an edit of, or it was already kind of really well forward moving track. And I think the transition just works here really well from Loss Aversion to Elysian, and it's, again, good tracks to go back and forth. And again, I get in this kind of rhythm of having a track where you really let the highs and lows develop, and then having a more of a progressive track after that where it just feels like it keeps moving forward. Just adds a lot to the narrative and the pacing of the mix, something that I couldn't quite do with my trance mix, but here I was able to control that a little bit better, and it makes all the difference. So the pacing of this mix is just significantly better. Okay, so again, when it comes to DJing in 2s and mixing in 2s, we got some melodic techno section, we got the little bit more progressive trance section, and then we get the little bit more main floor uplifting trance kind of section. Going into Another Youth, that has probably one of my favorite drops of all the trance tracks on my playlist. I love that 128 Super Saw, just kick only driving track. Maybe there's a ride there or something. But I love those drops like that. Going into Home, which again, both Another Youth and Home have the highs and lows in them, and they work well together. But the point there is that this is essentially a new section because they both have the similar characteristics where they drop and they build up quite a bit, like an uplifting trance track. And the transitions, again, just work well, but now we're in our third section. Melodic techno, progressive trance, uplifting trance, and then we bring it down into Berlin Haze. And this is kind of the area where you start to really appreciate the narrative being crafted here, because this is where I kind of look at the mix myself and think, I have no idea how I thought of going from Home into Berlin Haze, but it just sets up such a nice story, and the storytelling is just so good there that I'm really impressed I was able to pull that off. Now let's talk about what happened here, because this is kind of where I get carried away in the mix. And I tried to make this mix all in one sitting, but I ended up going from 1 through 10 in 1 through 11, I think, in one sitting. 1 through 11, I think, or so, in one sitting. And then I ran out of time, and I thought, okay, I need to get everything else done, and I made everything else actually up to here in one sitting. Up to Frost, in one sitting. But here's what ended up happening in this area. Again, somehow the Home to Berlin Haze transition just felt natural, and I don't know what I did there, but after that, I just got completely carried away. Right, we take a big turn in the mix and the narrative to this mix, but we're gonna talk about why it works in a second. Because remember, originally I had no clue how long I wanted this mix to be. I just wanted to make a mix, but make sure it was, at least an hour and had good pacing to it. But when you bring it down to Berlin Haze, which is just such a nice, soft, almost a very emotional, melodic trance track, and the transition just works really well into Amsterdam, which is a little bit even more emotional and really kind of hits hard because of the vocals, and it's just so soft and everything's just really nice about this track. You just take quite an emotional turn into that mix, and already going into Berlin Haze was kind of questionable because you take a big turn down in energy, but it just works so well. And then the Amsterdam transition just works just as well. And I just couldn't resist putting the two together, because going from the two tracks of Berlin Haze and Amsterdam back to back, it's just a hit to the heart so hard. And this is where I start to talk about a little bit about what happened in the trance mix, where I talked about in my trance mix, I think the most important thing that I needed to work on, other than the progression and being in touch and being in control of my highs and lows, is just knowing my tracks. Because the better you know your tracks and you know everything about the track, the start, the intro, the build up, the drop, what happens after the drop, the second drop, everything in between, how the outro goes, the more you know them, the better you are equipped to make the decisions of what comes next in your mix. And just going from Berlin Haze to Amsterdam, tracks that I know Berlin Haze kind of well, I know Amsterdam just really well. All I could hear in my head was just going from Amsterdam to Close the Distance. This is probably one of my favorite tracks. I think it's starting to get up there in one of my favorite tracks of all time. And you get this emotional area of the mix, and I couldn't resist it. I didn't want to. Every part of my body just did. Sorry, I guess not. That's not true. Every part of my brain said, don't play this track next, because if you play it next, you're just gonna kill everything you have going on in your mix, and you're just gonna take a super emotional turn that's gonna be hard to recover from. And basically my fear was, if I played Close the Distance, the mix would end there. And it probably would end there. And only, let's say we're 40 minutes in. It would have been a quick mix, and the pacing would have been horrible, which is the one thing I wanted to fix with my trance mix that kind of ended a little bit too soon. But going from Amsterdam and seeing that Close the Distance worked, the key and the BPM worked well, and I could just hear the two together, and my brain said no, but every part of my body couldn't resist playing this track next. And just the emotional journey you get from this track to Amsterdam to Close the Distance is absolutely unmatched. And naturally, it feels like you want to peak and hit that emotional climax with Close the Distance. But I'm in Record Box. I see that Concrete Angel works in the key and BPM, and I couldn't not play Concrete Angel. Another track that's becoming kind of one of my favorites. It's more of just the track that I like and I love, and that's definitely going to be one of my favorites. But Close the Distance is probably really creeping up in one of my all-time favorites, perpetual all-time favorites. But I just couldn't resist. And again, I know these two tracks like the back of my hand because I listen to them so often, that I just knew what would happen to the storytelling if you go straight from one to the other. And seeing them side by side, I just could not resist going from Close the Distance to Concrete Angel. Now at this point, I'm just in the moment, and I'm just emotionally peaking and going through every kind of emotion possible while I'm making this mix. And I can't resist going into Concrete Angel. And at this point, I think that kind of the mix is over. The mix is dead. I peaked emotionally hard with Close the Distance, and Concrete Angel is just such a beautiful track that you can't possibly follow anything up with it. But what ended up happening is, after you kind of get this emotional section, again, we're talking about mixing in twos. You go from Home to Berlin Haze, and then the last section kind of becomes Amsterdam to Close the Distance, where what ended up happening is, you get Berlin Haze as the next section, and then you get Close the Distance and Concrete Angel as the last section. But what ended up happening is Concrete Angel just kind of revived something in me and just gave a little bit more life to the mix. After you get this kind of peak energy and climax, emotional climax of Close the Distance, Concrete Angel just kind of revives it just enough where, as I've talked about before in my other mixes, it just sets the stage perfectly for a reset track. You have to have a reset track here. If you go anywhere else, the mix just falls apart. And I think I tried. I think I played Technicolor, and then I ran out of time. And then I kind of moved on, but I thought, what if I just went from Concrete Angel to, and just try to kind of keep pushing the mix forward? And I didn't work, so I thought, let me just go with what I did in the moment, which was Technicolor. But Concrete Angel, it just kind of breathes more life into the mix after the emotional climax of Close the Distance, and it just gives you just enough room to play something else and have you reset it to give you another go at your mix. So let's talk about what happened at this point, because as I mentioned, I'd made this in 2 sittings. I like doing it in 1, but the power of doing it in as little settings as possible is that, again, the storytelling would not have happened if I just tried to, lollygag and do random stuff. The fact that I was in the zone, I was able to create an unmatched story, in my opinion. An unmatched narrative for this mix going into Concrete Angel. And then again, I'm sitting down Concrete Angel. I was so ready to close the mix and just be like, oh, well, I failed again, but let's do this because the narrative is just there. But Concrete Angel just kind of breathed new life and just revived it just enough where I know Technicolor really, really well, because if you saw my trance mix breakdown, you'll know that was version 2, attempt number 2. In my first attempt, I had Technicolor as my reset track, and that's when I knew that this would work as a reset track, and in this case, I could use it as a reset track. So I go here, I get to Technicolor, and it works well as the reset and to give the mix new direction, and bam. We're good. We keep it rolling. We get another set, kind of the second half of the mix. And instead of killing the mix early and ending at about 40 minutes, you got a full 90-minute mix, and things worked out beautifully. All right, cool. But let's talk about the sections here, because I've always said that my mixes kind of come in parts as well. They kind of come in halves, and this is the exact good place to kind of separate the halves, which I should probably add a chapter. I forgot. Mixcloud allows you to do that. There's definitely a chapter here after Concrete Angel into Technicolor. So how do you revive the mix after you get this emotional kind of journey right here that it's going to be hard to come back from? What ends up happening is you get this first half of the mix, and then when you come in with the reset track, which in this case is Technicolor, the drop of first of all, the build-up goes there, and then the vocal, kind of the track comes down, and then the vocals come in to, get you to set you up for the drop. The drop of Technicolor, Boris Fong remix is very uplifting. It has a lot more synth energy to it that you didn't quite get over here. You kind of got over here, but for the most part you didn't get. So it definitely breathes new life into the mix. And then it sets you up in a new direction, because if over here we defined our movement, we kind of defined the atmosphere over here, but we defined the movement with the progressive tracks. After the reset track, we kind of defined the second half to be more uplifting and more energetic. So it allows you to recover from this, because you were melodic, you were progressive, you were uplifting, and you were very, very melodic again. But once you get back into uplifting, it lets you go into uplifting and have the second track be more energetic than the first. Because if your peak was over here with these uplifting tracks, overall the first section is lower energy. So if you have overall the second section higher energy, bam, everything works. So that is what we do. We go into Technicolor. We get the energy going, and then we kind of do some very normal stuff, in my opinion, right? You set the atmosphere and you set the tone with Technicolor, that uplifting drop. And the transition to Abyss works miraculously well. I don't know how, but it works so well. And after Technicolor, you kind of you get it a little bit more progressive, and it's progressive but with higher energy. Loss Aversion and Elysian were progressive with, let's call it, medium energy. When you go to progressive with higher energy, it gives the second half of the mix just kind of more overall energy. You hit this high, and then what you end up doing is you bring it down to bring it to a final climax. So the Abyss and Breathe In just work really well. Again, a little bit more progressive, but you get progressive with overall higher energy. You keep you keep the mix moving forward. Big drop with Technicolor. Progressive Trance track with the Abyss. That's a little bit darker too. It has some dark elements and a little bit more of a nuance to it. Just pushes the track forward and lets you know, okay, second half incoming. We got the drop. Now let's keep the mix moving forward. Let's set the pacing. And the pacing is set. Again, the transition just works really well with the Abyss. The narrative is there. Finally into Breathe In, which is our last melodic techno track. It's also a little bit more kind of euphoric and has these big moments in it. So it's good to have this melodic techno track in the second section because it's just a little bit bigger and larger than these other tracks. These are definitely more lower energy melodic techno tracks. Breathe In is just a little bit larger overall. You know, it has that lower energy and then it has that peak. So it just works well to, again, get Technicolor, reset, set the atmosphere, set the direction with the Abyss, Breathe In. You're essentially going high, medium, low, medium, high, climax, closure. That's kind of what we do with the second half of the mix. That works really well. Now, as far as the mixing in twos goes, this last area was definitely a little bit more impulsive. I don't know these tracks as well as I do, these tracks. So this was a little bit more impulsive and just kind of taking what I had in the moment. But again, the direction just works well. If over here we're DJing in twos, here we're going back to my traditional strategy where you have your reset track that's pretty high in energy because you need to do something after hitting this emotional climax. So we go back to my normal kind of mixing strategy. High energy, middle energy, lower energy, medium energy, higher energy, and then we kind of pick up the narrative again over here. But anyways, Technicolor to the Abyss. I know Breathe In really well, or like the back of my hand, so I knew it would work there. But after that, you kind of have to bring the life back into the mix because if you bring it back down, it'll sound too much like the first section, and we want to demonstrate that we're somewhere new. We're not in the first section anymore. We are in the second section. So it makes sense to A, bring the energy back up, and B, let's commit to the uplifting. I like uplifting trance. I definitely wanted this mix to include uplifting trance, and we already defined the section to be an uplifting trance section. So once we bring it down, we bring it up, and we kind of commit to the uplifting trance for the final few tracks, for the last few tracks of the section. Going into Take Me Away by Ben Gold. I think a 135 or so BPM track that I play at 130 because A, it matches Breathe In, and B, you don't want to go too hard into it or else, again, you'll peak a little bit too early. In this track, we kind of peak over here or so. There's no hard peak. We kind of peak here, and then I'll talk about what we do. But you go into Take Me Away. You go back into the uplifting trance, and you get what feels like a medium energy drop, especially for uplifting trance. It's kind of like a medium energy uplifting trance track, and especially when you play it at 130, which allows you to go into the next section because we go Take Me Away into Solar Plexus. Transition works really well. Again, you get a little bit more of a nuanced, slightly dark, acidic trance track. You get the lows of Solar Plexus. By the way, you definitely get a progressive edit of Ben Gold's Take Me Away, I'm pretty sure, which allows you to get the lows of Solar Plexus and get a nice, pretty standard uplifting trance drop with Solar Plexus and give you that peak, which is where you kind of start to get the closure. So again, it's coming back to me now that I'm listening to it again, because again, I'm not too familiar with I'm familiar with this track and this section, but I know these like the back of my hand. This was a little bit more impulsive, so it's coming back to me now, right? You get the Technicolor, you go then to a medium track, then to a lower energy track, which overall Breathe In is medium energy, but it has that lower portion, which again, I cannot emphasize enough why it's important to know your tracks, because I knew Breathe In had the lower portion. I knew it would work here to satisfy the low energy requirement, finish at medium energy because the track finishes at medium energy, and also I made a progression out of it so I could finish it at medium energy and go into an uplifting medium energy, Take Me Away. And what happens is this is where you get your big uplifting trance fix. Take Me Away gives you a pretty standard medium energy uplifting trance drop. Solar Plexus gives you that higher energy uplifting trance drop. And after that, I talked about in my mixes, especially my open format mix, how I like to end with emotion. And then we go back into DJing in twos, right? So you get the Abyss and Breathe Me In. You kind of get Take Me In Away. Actually, so yeah, this is in twos again, now that I'm really looking at it and remembering what I did. You have your reset track. This is in twos. even though this kind of this is kind of in 3s and 2s, because even though this is your reset track, it kind of gives you that high, medium, low, medium, high energy over here. So it's strange. But 2s, definitely 2s giving you medium energy uplifting trance, high energy uplifting trance. And then you move on into another high energy uplifting trance, but then you move on to kind of the emotional aspects. So the ones that just feel naturally a little bit more emotional, because even though these have the trance emotion to them, these just have a little bit more emotion to them, especially with the lyrics of, In This Life, that just make it feel that way. That piano and all the really nice things you get after the intro. And the drop just sounds a little bit more emotional, almost kind of euphoric in a way, and very large. So you get In This Life, which I need to correct this. You get In This Life to give you that emotional drop, the nice emotional drop to signal you that this is going to be your climax. Which after that you go into Faralskad, if I pronounce it correctly, by Rinaldi. A DJ I actually saw live nearby, so big inspiration for kind of my trance kick. This was sometime in May, I think. And again, I know this track really well as well, so it just worked out well. I kind of struggled here. Originally, I had In This Life to Faralsk, and then I didn't know if I liked it or not, and then I experimented with a few other things, but I ultimately decided to go with my intuition, which was these 3 tracks in a row. But knowing these tracks, again, you just get that emotion. You get In This Life. By the way, I should add that In This Life, you get this emotional drop. And for Faralskad, we finally bring it to 138, so it gives it kind of that movement forward that it needs, where these 2 tracks still work, because In This Life is nice emotional, gives you that climax, but Faralskad also comes down and up. Both these tracks come down and up, versus Take Me Away doesn't. Solar Plexus does, but it gives you that last of the kind of standard uplifting trance, then into the emotional uplifting trance with which both come down and up. You get 138 for Faralskad, which again just gives you some really nice emotion there, kind of wraps you up and starts to give you that emotional climax, and almost signals you that we're nearing the end here. Into finally a track that's one of my favorites, also kind of kicked off my trance kick, which I don't know if I mentioned, in my Trance Mix Volume 1, the original version, the attempt number 1, I actually ended with Music Rescues Me, which is the track I wanted to end with because I really like the emotional closure it gives you. But I didn't, and I ended up swapping it in attempt number 2. But here I know the track really well. Again, I know the type of closure it gives you, and I thought this has to be kind of, what other way could you end it with? Now the transition works phenomenally from Faralskad to Music Rescues Me, but let's talk about something that I talked about. When did I mention this? I think I mentioned this in my Summer Drives breakdown, actually. How I like to have an emotional climax track and actually a closer track. And the hard part about the last track here, Music Rescues Me, is that what ends up happening is Music Rescues Me almost feels like your emotional climax. You don't quite satisfy it with In This Life and Faralskad. You almost do. You satisfy it kind of just enough. But when you go into Music Rescues Me, it gives it a new nuance, and then Music Rescues Me feels like your new emotional climax. And then, traditionally, what I would need to do is actually put another song after it and give you a closure song. This was tough. Part of me wanted to put another song and edit it and put another song before Music Rescues Me. Part of me wanted to put another song after Music Rescues Me, so it was a matter of having an emotional climax track and then closure with Music Rescues Me, or have this as your emotional climax and then have a closure track after. And I'm not gonna lie, I really struggled. Actually, that's not true. I didn't struggle at all. I was really torn between what I should do, but what ended up happening is, as I was doing the second half all in one sitting, in my head, I kind of heard what I needed and wanted to do with the track. So I do something very, very untraditional here. Music Rescues Me definitely gives you that emotional climax, but it almost doesn't give you that closure. It's close. It's very close because we almost got it here, but because of the nuance of Music Rescues Me, it doesn't give you the closure. And when I was recording this and I thought, okay, this is the last track, and I thought, is this going to give me the closure I need? And I was thinking, no, it wouldn't. But for some reason, I feel like all I would need to give it that closure is some vocal kind of in the background, just some standard vocal of something, not even a vocal, someone talking, some spoken word that would give it that edge and allow you to close it. And I can already hear the vocal, or rather the words, kind of the spoken word in my head. And I think, oh man, where do I get it? What am I hearing here? And the entire time I was hearing Fellow Feeling by Porter Robinson. So that's exactly what I did. Again, this is one of those things that I definitely touched up. This is something that I could not do, in the moment, but now I have it available to me. If when I was recording this in one sitting, I ended with Music Rescues Me, but if I had the ability to just magically throw in the fellow feeling vocal, I would. And ultimately that's what I had to do. I had to make the mashup on my own so that when I recorded this, as the final, as you know, to actually get the recording in, I had the mashup of Music Rescues Me and Fellow Feeling, because again, that's part of what I think makes artists. It's not necessarily, you know, doing all the small things, but it's having that vision and being the curator, which I talked about in my AI breakdown video. It's about being kind of the curator and being able to imagine and be creative and put these things together. So if I had the ability to extract the fellow feeling vocal and throw it on in the moment, I would have. That's absolutely something I would have done. But I need to be a little bit more prepared if I want to do that. So I had to prepare a little bit, and that's finally what I decided to end with in the track. So you make an edit of Music Rescues Me, you throw in the fellow feeling vocal, and that's what ultimately gives you just enough closure in the mix. Because with that vocal, with Music Rescues Me being extended a little bit longer and given more room to kind of soak in, and you throw in the extra nuance of the vocal on top of it, plus the vocal in the outro, it allows it to give you the closure it needs. You got the vocal, you got that area of just the instrumental again to allow you to soak in one more time. And you get the outro where after you get the vocal, you soak in the instrumental one more time. The outro finally feels like the closure. And you throw the fellow feeling vocal on top of that just to give it a little bit more nuance. And you get just enough closure out of Music Rescues Me. And I mean just enough. And it's almost not enough. So for all you astute people out there, for the people who listened to the end and picked up on something strange, it's just not enough. You throw in a closure chord. And again, if I could extract what I heard in my brain and throw it in the mix, if I were doing this live, you throw in the last chord of the Thrill Porter Robinson remix. So you get the outro drums of Music Rescues Me. You get the vocal of Fellow Feeling, especially at the end. You get that nuance. Final chord just kind of wraps it up in a bow and gives you just enough closure. It barely works, but because of that, you just kind of get this sweet spot where you end it emotionally on that sweet note, but you still get the closure out of it. And I don't think I've ever ended a mix that way, right? My mixes they always end on that closure bit where you know it's over and you're kind of just, you know, you're back in reality, you're out of the mix, the world of the mix, and you've been brought back into the world, you know, the real world, because, you know, I've mentioned how music can be kind of an escape, how it can be a release, it can be an escape. So usually my mixes, I like to end my mixes in a way that brings you back to the real world. Here, it just ends right in that middle where you end in the world of the music, you get that climax, and you get the closure, and you're still quite in the world of the mix, but you're able to kind of come back to the real world because you got that closure. So you're not ending in the world of the mix, you're ending in the real world, but you just got that kind of, that emotional note. And that is Opus. Now, the big takeaway here is Opus is the perfect idea and kind of thought and theme and exactly what I'm trying to gather. Because if you all the things I just mentioned that I spent over an hour recording, over an hour talking about that go into this mix, these are all the things that I want you to appreciate, that I want listeners to appreciate and listen to. And they need to go in a mix titled Opus. They can't go in another mix. They go into my mixes. They've gone into all these mixes, all the subtleties and the nuances. But this is a mix meant for the people that will appreciate them. They're progressive tracks, they're long-term tracks. It's a 90-minute mix. Again, the big takeaway is that is Opus. There are all these subtleties, there are all the decisions and methodical things and carefully crafted narratives and stories and decisions being made that need to be appreciated, and they belong in an Opus mix, and that is the Opus mix. Everything I just talked about, everything I mentioned, all the subtleties and nuances of why I want my mixes to have more weight than them, other than just recording something for 60 minutes and putting it on the internet. All the decisions that have some weight into them. I pretty much said everything about the mix already. So again, everything that goes into these mixes, that is what Opus stands to represent. That is what I want Opus to be about, and that is what I want the listener to be able to listen to, appreciate, and get out of Opus. So there you go. That is Opus. All right, and that is about it. I'm lower and lower in my chair because all my energy is gone. I had all my zeal and my passion and my vigor were just thrown into the breakdown here, because again, I want these, I kid you not, these are the things that go through my head when I make a mix, even in my live sets, not to the same extent, but even in my live sets. So I really hope people out there can appreciate them. And again, I think this is a phenomenal mix. I think this is a beautiful mix. I really do. I think this is an artistic mix. Which brings us to the end of Opus. That brings us to the end of this video. Everything I want to be able to represent in a mix is now going to be going into my mixes and under the Opus category. All these characteristics will still be in my other mixes, but Opus is the place for those who can appreciate them, for those who will appreciate them. So with that being said, thank you so much for watching. Let me know if you guys have any questions or comments down in the comments. Let me know if you like this mix, if you dislike this mix, if you picked up on anything I said, if you guys, if you guys also take these things into consideration when you make your mixes, or if you guys think I'm just rambling and making stuff up. Because again, at this point, I feel like I've said anything. I really hope the people who are here are the ones who will appreciate this. There's not much more I can say. That is the point of Opus. You're here. I think you'll appreciate it. If you're not here, you won't appreciate it, and you're not listening to it or watching this video anyways, and that's okay. But still, the comments are open for discussion for anyone to share, opinionate, for anyone to share, give their opinion, or discuss on the mix or anything related. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. But other than that, that is all I have for you. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.